Good morning. I'm Lillian Lodge Kopenhaver, Executive Director of the Lillian Lodge Kopenhaver Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication here in the School of Communication at FIU. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to our second annual National Conference on Women in Communication, Breaking the Barriers. Dean Brian Schreiner sends his regrets that he's unable to join us this morning. He wanted to thank you all for coming today and being part of this most important conference. We do indeed have an exciting and enlightening program planned for you throughout the day. I know that you are all aware that women make up 51% of the population of the United States. It is therefore very important that communications in this country represent the population equitably, both in the information that is delivered and in those who deliver that information. Only in this way can we protect and defend our democratic society. The mission of the Kopenhaver Center is to empower both women professionals and academics in all of the fields of communication in order to develop visionaries and leaders who can make a difference in their communities and in their professions. Our conference today will provide us with an opportunity to explore the reality of the role and status of women in communication and chart a pathway to help women realize their potential and become those visionaries and leaders of tomorrow. If you look at your programs, you will see that we have a lunch break from 12:15 to 1:15, and we begin back again at 1:30 in this room. We will close with a networking reception at 5:30 in this room right here, so please join us for some food and some networking. It's now my pleasure to introduce Stephanie Bertini, a reporter at NBC6 here in Miami, and our MC for this morning's program. Stephanie?
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Kopenhaver. You know, first, I'd just like to say that it really is my pleasure to be here as someone who wants to see women succeed in this business, but also truly loves and believes in what communication arts should be, what journalism should be, what democracy should be. It's really my pleasure to be here. Just a few words about Dr. Kopenhaver. You know, she started with this center specifically in 2013, but of course, she was formerly the dean of the School of Communication Arts here, and she has a long history here at FIU. More than that, though, we've been working together a couple years. And what I identified in her is a soul that transcends time, that transcends change, and that transcends all of the negative that people say about our business. See, I started in this business just over 10 years ago, and I remember the talk about the change and the bad journalism and what you can't be, and you know, the school of hard knocks talking about this new age of journalism, this is what we have to preserve. And then I remember 5 years in, the talk about, you know, well, the oldies are gonna get outdated and this is the new wave, and now we're talking social media, then we were talking internet and the this and the that and all the change. But what has remained is the integrity of what this should be. I believe the best journalists and the people that love this the most, that's what remains. And Dr. Kopenhaver has that kind of soul. So thank you very much for bringing us together and for having us here. Again, it is my honor, and I'm sure everybody in this room is here because they truly love this craft and they truly love what this should be. So thank you very much, Dr. Kopenhaver. Please, a round of applause for this wonderful woman who I respect so much. We're gonna move on now. We're gonna start with a little introduction, okay? Our keynote speaker this morning, Ann Vasquez, she's right here. Give her a round of applause first. Let's welcome her. So Ms. Vasquez is the Chief Digital Officer of tronc Inc., formerly Tribune Publishing, where she's responsible for working across the company's 9 markets to grow digital audiences and revenue. Prior to that role, she was the managing editor at the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, the 2013 winner of the Pulitzer Prize Gold Medal for Public Service. We know that's a big one. Now, currently as the newsroom's number 2 editor from 2011 to 2016, Vasquez spearheaded sweeping culture change to reinvent the newsroom for the 21st century. She works across marketing, advertising, and circulation divisions to grow audiences and reinvent the newsroom for this century. So a big role and a very progressive role indeed. Born and raised in Miami, so she's local to Cuban immigrants, Vasquez graduated with a degree in journalism from Florida International University. That was in '96. She began her career at the Miami Herald before moving to Northern California, where she worked as a reporter and editor at the San Jose Mercury News during the dot-com bubble and bust. Vasquez returned to South Florida in 2006 to join the Sun Sentinel, where, as business editor, she revamped the money section in print and online before being named deputy managing editor / digital and tasked with overseeing sunsentinel.com, a very big role indeed. Vasquez currently serves on the board of the American Society of News Editors and previously served on the board of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. She lives in Los Angeles with her husband and her 2 children. Let's give her a very warm welcome and another round of applause.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Dr. Kopenhaver and the Kopenhaver Center and the School of Communication and Journalism for having me here. It's really an honor to be back at my alma mater and to talk about women empowerment and breaking through barriers. And before we get started, I wanted to do a few special introductions, if you would humor me. They're sitting in the front row and in the second row. You're going to learn about me in a few minutes, and you heard that I'm the daughter of Cuban immigrants, and as such, I have a lot of my family members here today, because that's what we do. Wanted to start with introducing my mother, Maria Martinez. She's in the front row. My mother has a long history with FIU, spent more than 20 years working here in various divisions for various deans and vice presidents, and spent her last several years as the executive assistant to then President Modesto Medic. And my father, Felix Martinez, whom you'll hear more about in a few minutes, is sitting right next to her. My sister, who's filming, Lillian Peters, also an FIU graduate, and she's also still involved with the College of Business on the Dean's Council. And then I have at the very front my 2 children, Danny, who is 12 years old, and my daughter, Veronica, who is 7. Both of whom I hope get a little insight into their mom today and why it is I do what I do and why it is it's, a lot of times I may not be the one to be able to pick you up from school. This is why. So it's startling to learn through some of the research that the Kopenhaver Center has done that women are 3 times less likely than men to hold top positions in communication, and that we're more likely than men to earn less for similar positions. When it comes to navigating careers, I feel like I'm still learning, and I think that it's only at moments like this where I start to reflect on my 21 years in this business that I really think about, okay, how did I get here, and what are the steps that I've taken? And I'd tell you that it was a lot of hard work, but also a lot of luck. But there'll be a lot of studies to tell you that that's such a woman thing to say, right? Own your own success. And when you think about the rules, the unspoken rules, the spoken rules that we're supposed to follow, it's enough to want to tear your hair out. If I think about it, I alternately in my career have been told to cowboy up. I've also been told to don't act as though you think you're the smartest person in the room. I have been applauded for being a hard driver of results, but I've always been asked to be more likable while doing it. And I should smile more, always smile more. And so navigating these waters are tricky, and if anyone tells you they know the steps you need to take in order to achieve what you want to achieve, if there's a silver bullet, they're fooling themselves, and they're fooling you, because there is no silver bullet. But we can learn from each other's experiences, and that's what I'm hoping to do today. And so rather than present you, I'm going to have a few slides, but they're really going to be images. I'm not going to show you charts or graphs. I think there's one in there. But really, these are images that conjure up some of the life lessons I've learned throughout my career that I'd like to share with you today. And as I started to think about what I was going to say today and how to frame my thoughts, I kept coming back to this notion that there are stages to breaking through the barriers for women. And I think these stages are a lot like the 5 stages of grief. Doesn't that sound fitting? I mean, but think about it. Think about it. You have denial, you have anger, you have bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And so humor me and let's walk through some of these steps with that in mind. Am I doing this correctly? So these images. So who am I? Well, I'm the daughter of Maria and Felix Martinez, my sister Lillian, my brother Felix. My parents' story is very similar to a story that probably will resonate with a lot of folks in this room. They came from Cuba in 1962, and they came here with little or nothing. They had to leave their homes, and they had to leave family, and they had to start brand new. And in some cases, in the case of my father, still learning the language here. And through that, they didn't have to tell me and sit me down and teach me some life lessons. I learned through their experience. People ask me, well, Anne, you speak very self-assured. Where do you get that self-confidence? And it always comes back to my family, because it's a very powerful lesson. When we talk about that first stage, denial, not seeing a ceiling is very powerful. Not knowing or believing that there are barriers and obstacles that can be in your way is very powerful. And I learned that as a child through my family, through my experience learning and hearing about the stories of my parents and how they acclimated to a new life here. They began their lives in Chicago. A family sponsored them there to get them on their feet. They moved to New York. That's where they had my sister and my brother in Staten Island. My dad enrolled at NYU, working full-time, going to school full-time at night. And so you see there the graduation picture of my father at NYU, the first in his family to go to college. And he's holding my brother. And I've always heard my father say, you know, those first years of Felix's life, I didn't really see him that much because I was working all day and I was going to school at night, and my mom was there to support him every step of the way. And then they moved to Miami, and that's where I was born. And there was an upward mobility in our family, but there was always this understanding that no matter how tough it gets, even if you get pushed down, even if someone tells you you can't do something, there's always a way. As my mom has always said, there's a solution for everything. And so I think about the early parts of my career. I started at the Miami Herald soon after I graduated at FIU. And I had been a reporter for about a year at the Broward Bureau covering city government. And there was an opportunity to cover education. And I really was interested in education. In fact, I had previously wanted to become a teacher because I thought a teacher plays such an important role in the lives of our children. They can make or break your spirit. They can build you up or break you down. And I thought it was a very important beat. And I remember, just a year out of college, going to breakfast, and I asked him to breakfast, the managing editor, Larry Olmsted at the time, who's a good friend today, and I told him why I wanted this job. And I told him I was ready to do it. And you know, one day I want to run my own newsroom. And I got to say, he was probably taken aback by the thread of our conversation. And it's not as though I always thought I knew more than anybody else, but I knew I always wanted to be part of the conversation. And I knew you had to raise your hand and that people weren't necessarily going to tap you on the shoulder. That's something that, frankly, I really had to learn over and over again, because I thought, oh, hard work just gets you where you want to go. And that's just not the case. And so that source of confidence, I suggest to all of you, find your source of confidence. For me, it's my family. Find that source of confidence and hold on to it as if your career depends on it, because in many ways, it does. So going on to the next stage, anger. Now you're going to wonder, well, why does she have a nice, cute picture of her family up for the stage about anger? Well, early in my career, and throughout my career, I was always told I can't have that and be at the top. You got to pick. It's that or being at the top. And I was getting those messages just in general throughout our society, through our networks, and I also didn't necessarily have a whole lot of role models. There were certainly more female leaders in our newsrooms, but the ones that I saw at the top didn't always necessarily have a family, and they weren't always a mom and juggling the demands of being a mom and being juggling your career. And I didn't want to have to make that choice. And I think that it's a different experience for everyone, and I certainly don't have it all figured out. My children know that there are many days where I can be a better mother. And I'm sure at the office, I feel there are many, well, there's nods. And at the office, there are days where I feel like I need to be able to do more. But you know, that juggle and that struggle, that's okay. And that's something that I encourage you to not listen to those negative voices that say you can't, because you may not be able to figure it out right away. You may be I'm still figuring it out today. But taking those little steps really make all the difference. And I do think that with every new generation, hopefully it's going to become easier and easier for the generations, but I don't think we talk about it enough. So even though it might be different today than it certainly was 20 years ago, than it was 40 years ago, I think it's venues like this where we can talk about it, where I think it's really helpful, because I still get calls from people who are either coming up early in their careers or are still learning to navigate and are seeking advice. Well, how did you do it? And again, there's no silver bullet. It's just making that commitment that I'd like to take a risk. And those calculated risks are important. So I didn't get that job. That job that I wanted, that education reporter job at the Miami Herald, didn't get it. And it's a good thing I didn't get it, because that propelled me to take a job as an education reporter at the San Jose Mercury News. And I moved across the country. I was at the Herald for about 2.5 years before I moved on. And moving across the country to a new place, to a new newsroom, and starting from zero, was really the single most important decision I made in my career. And not because it led to a lot of success, and not because it led to a lot of money, but because it was that first giant leap I took that paid off. And it showed me you can take a risk, and you can figure things out, and you can start to believe in yourself. And all of that starts to build that foundation that I think will propel you throughout your career. And I will say that the anger part, balancing work-life, certainly that made me want to drive and made me want to work harder. But there's also moments where you don't get what you want. I didn't get that job. There are promotions I wanted and I didn't get. There were, increases in my salary I wanted that I didn't get. And I was told sometimes. I remember sitting down at lunch with my supervisor one time when I was pregnant with my son. And I was looking to take the next step in my career. I wanted to run my own department. I had been an editor and I wanted to run my own department. And I was encouraged then. The advice I was given was, it may not be a great idea to take on being a department head while balancing the juggles, balancing the demands of being a new mom. That's probably too much. And I believe that advice was given to me with every intent of being helpful. I also believe that advice would not have been given to a man who was about to be a new dad. And it's moments like those where you need to take it, listen to it, and then process it in your own way and make the decision that's best for you. I was also told one time when I was up for a job that if I were a betting man, that other guy will get the job. That one I did get. So these moments, take those moments. There's nothing more motivating for me, and I'm sure for many of you. If someone tells me that I am incapable of doing something, that drives me even more to make sure that I can. There's nothing more motivating than that. So find your strength, take those risks. So going on to the third stage. Third stage is bargaining, right? And in the 5 stages of grief, it's bargaining. It's also called the rationalizing stage. And by rationalizing, this is what I say when it comes to breaking through barriers, is where it comes into play, that imposter syndrome you've always heard about, right? You've started to find your bearings, you have that confidence, you're asking for what you want, and you're starting to get what you want. But then you get that promotion, or you get a really big assignment, and you get a job with a whole lot more responsibility, and you start asking yourself, well, can I really do that? They're asking me to do something I've never done. They're going to realize I have no idea what I'm doing. That whole imposter syndrome. And it's a very real experience, and it's something that I think I have experienced through every stage of my career, and I still experience it. When I moved into digital, I had grown up through the print ranks. I had been a Metro reporter, an assistant city editor. I had been the race and demographics team editor. I'd even been the Sunday features editor and the business editor. And then I had a publisher come by and tell me, we really need you to take over the digital operations. And this is when the digital operation was very separate from the whole overall newsroom operation. And I said, well, I don't know anything about digital. How am I going to, I don't know that. And I even wanted assurances that if I failed, I can come back and do my job, because I wasn't sure I could do it. And working through those fears, I'm so glad I took that job, because had I not taken that opportunity, I wouldn't be in the job I am today. And that was 2009 when I took that job. And I didn't know, like I said, I didn't know much about digital. And I started getting on these conference calls throughout the company, and they were speaking in a language I did not understand. There were acronyms, I had no idea what they were referring to, and I spent most of my meetings just taking notes and saying, I got to figure out what that means later. Or I'd hear someone's name, and I'd say, I got to figure out who that is. And so those first 6 months and that first year, it was really a steep learning curve. But every day I knew more than I did the day before, and I just started to feel more comfortable and gain that confidence. And so what I say to you is, don't listen to that voice in your head that's telling you, maybe you can't do it, or maybe you're not just ready, maybe not just yet. Just own your success. And so now you're probably wondering, why do I have the photo of our Pulitzer win up here for this stage? Well, I'm very proud of this. This is a very happy moment, as you can see. I've got my mouth open, it looks like a football game. But I got to tell you, sometimes this photo, it's always made me cringe a little bit too. And why? Why do you ask? Well, I've found that there's two camps of managers, of editors, if you will. Some who, are very happy to be micromanaging a project and putting their fingerprints all over it, and spelling out the role that they played in the project. And then there's others, and I've always been in the other camp, which is, I think a good manager, I think an editor really should be behind the scenes. They should be coaching. They should be helping those who are at the front lines, making their jobs easier, maybe massaging stories. And so I've always been in that camp. And so I feel like here, I'm too front and center. It makes me uncomfortable. I should be maybe off to the side. And that's a real feeling that I have. Some people would think that's silly. And I would tell you, I don't know if others would even share that same concern, but the two reporters, Sally Keston and John Maines, and their editor, who's not even in the picture, are the ones who really drove our Speeding Cops series project. But it was a newsroom-wide project. It took a lot of finessing to get that project launched and to get it into the shape that we wanted it to be. But I look at that photo, and that's a real feeling that I have. And so what I say to you is, don't let that voice take over. Don't let that voice rule your world. Don't let it rule your career. It's natural to have it, but learn to ignore it. So next stage, depression. I'll get to the photo in a second. I'm a glass half full kind of person, so I'm not going to call this one depression. I'm going to call it as, there's no such thing as a failure stage. And, throughout anyone's career and throughout life, you can't have those highs without having the lows. You are always going to face challenges, and they're going to be real, and they're going to be hard, and you're going to think you can't overcome them. And when I think on my career, there's been plenty of challenges. And I would say just in this last year alone, it was this time last year, where I took on this role. And previously, I'd been the managing editor of the Sun Sentinel and working with the newsroom there. And some of my proudest achievements there was really working to change the culture and make it a more digital culture, which we'll talk a little bit about. But really, working with one newsroom is one challenge. Working with 9 different newsrooms and then trying to figure out, in our industry, what is the right model? How do we make money off of our journalism so that we can continue to do great, credible journalism going forward? That's a huge challenge. And it hasn't come without some lows. Does that look familiar? If you've followed the newspaper industry at all in the last year, you'll know that our company was involved in a high-profile potential acquisition by Gannett, and we changed our name, and we were making lots of changes and doing things more quickly than I think had traditionally been the case. And we put together some videos to try to express what we were doing, and you know what? I was part of that video, and it didn't necessarily come off exactly how you wanted it to. Even the best of intentions can sometimes fall flat. So if you're not familiar, I suggest you just Google John Oliver after this session, and you'll see plenty of context for this. I watched every Vine video. I watched this. You know what? It was funny. You got to be able to laugh at yourself. And I'm living proof here today that I'm actually not a robot, and I can speak without lacing my words with jargon. But what you don't know is that while this happened, we also were able to accomplish this in our company. And I'm just showing you the LA Times chart, but video became a very important part of our strategy last year in video storytelling. And for years, I'd been with this company for 10 years, we weren't able to really move the needle. We did in certain markets. I was able to do that at the Sun Sentinel. We were able to really make video a priority. But as a company, we hadn't. And in the last 6-7 months, we really made that change. And changing the culture, I mean, that's a great chart right there. It's off the charts. And that's something that I think you got to just remember. With the highs will come the lows. And you just got to work through them. And as my very smart mom would say, there's a solution for everything. Maybe the first solution is not the best one, but you work towards the right solution. And so when I think about the final stage, which is acceptance, so what does it mean? What does it look like to have more women in positions of power, in positions of authority, making decisions in communication? Well, I would say it could look like this for me. I'm really, really happy with these photos. This was during my time at the Sun Sentinel. And that's me holding her baby. Sarah, who was our video director at the time, had just come back from maternity leave with her third child, and she's holding a meeting. She's talking to the sports staff. You can see they're all men, and she's directing the meeting. And I told her and encouraged her to bring her child because she was still making her way back and forth. And I'd hold her baby sometimes in the meeting. And, you know, when I look at these images, this is the kind of place I want to work for. This is the kind of place that I think when you have women in the position to be able to make decisions, they may make decisions that look like this, and it may look different for another woman. I remember the first meeting she had. It was probably a good month where, you know, Maddie, her name is Madeline, the baby, made an appearance in our newsroom pretty regularly. And Sarah was so concerned. We had a big meeting, myself and the editor-in-chief and her needed to talk through our entries for the Emmy Awards. And she didn't know what to do. And I said, you know what? You have an office. Bring a pack and play. You can have the baby nap there, and we'll have the meeting. And the meeting went on for 90 minutes. And at certain points, I'm holding the baby, she's holding the baby, and we get through our meeting. And you know what? Howard, the editor-in-chief, he was totally fine with it. He was okay. I was okay with it. Sarah was okay. And that's what we need to encourage each other to do. You know, when I talk about the culture change at the Sun Sentinel, it was also about changing from print mentality to digital, and we made a lot of changes there. But part of the driving force for me to really push that change was I really wanted to improve the morale of the newsroom. We had people who were working from, you know, very early in the morning till very late at night, because in the digital world, you got to get up early, but then in the print world, you're still putting things to bed very late at night. And it just wasn't sustainable. You couldn't have people, you know, working that long and answering questions at all hours of the night. And so changing that culture was really important to me. And so what I say to you and my last thoughts, you know, own your space in this world and make it better, not just for women, but for men and people for all walks of life, because we need you and we need more of you. Thank you.
Another round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen. Wow. You know, listening to you speak, and I don't know if the females here, and maybe the men, but the females especially can identify, you were saying so many things that I've thought, that I've wondered if others have thought, that maybe I've had in personal conversations with other females in the business. But the courage to come up here and kind of paint that out and share your personal perspective, thank you so much. And I think that it's really an important conversation. You know, we touched on a lot of things. Women, obviously, unlike men, most of us have some sort of a biological clock. I've heard that silent tick for the last couple of years, you know. women, sometimes they say, we're more sensitive, we're more sentimental. So sometimes changing, I mean, I've certainly moved from market to market, and sometimes that hurts a little more, or is perceived to. And sometimes women, we're stronger than our male colleagues, but people underestimate us. So I think definitely a lot of perspective and very heartfelt keynote address this morning. Thank you. We're going to move on now to our morning panel. So what we'll do first is we're going to introduce the players in the panel. Oh, pardon me. Yes. Any questions first?
We have a microphone over here for anyone who'd like to ask any questions.
Oh, good. So maybe you can say your name and introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is April Klimley. I am actually a working journalist, and I belong to the Association of Women in Communications. We've come down here from Boca for this conference. Anyway, my question was, when you saw those numbers go up over the last year, was it really due to, could you in any way determine whether it was due to what you did in each market, or whether or not it had to do with the news cycle, which within the last year, online, digitally, was tremendously powerful because of the election?
Is this working? Well, first what I'll say is it certainly wasn't only me. Those numbers moved because of the hard work of all of our newsrooms. No? Try this one. Oh, thank you. I would say that it was certainly through the hard work of all the newsrooms. But no, when you grow year over year almost 500%, that's not a news cycle. That's really a change in culture, and I think you would probably have a lot of folks in the newsrooms who would agree with that. And when I say change in culture, it was, let's prioritize video. And it's not just any kind of video, it's prioritize relevant video storytelling and tell that with the story. It's not either or. It's not video storytelling at the expense of the written word. So I think it was made part of the conversation much sooner in the ideation of stories. It was, about accountability and making sure you're asking about that every day, day in and day out. It was experimenting with different types of programming, experimenting with how do you program video on the page? Do you autoplay it? Do you not? It was creating a small team that played air traffic control with all the markets so that they were constantly looking and working with the markets. Hey, here's an opportunity that is a story that's doing very well but doesn't have video. Can we help you? How can we do that? This video team also helped on those national stories where you don't want 9 markets creating the same video. If Mary Tyler Moore dies, for example, you don't want 9 different markets creating the same video. And so sharing best practices and sharing the work with one another. So I really do think that's what it was. And I've been with the company now 11 years. We've tried to grow video views before. We've never seen that kind of growth.
Okay.
Oh. Well, we got a special little question here in the audience. Come on, little miss. You need to take the microphone. So tell us your name.
I'm Veronica.
How old are you, Veronica?
I'm 7.
I mean, this lady's your mom. All right, for the newcomers, this is her mom. Okay, so tell us your question.
Were you happy when you saw the chart go up?
Oh, I was very happy. In fact, every month that would go by, I would be looking at those numbers like a hawk. And when I saw those numbers go up, I would be ecstatic because that was a result of a lot of hard work from a lot of people. But not as happy as when I saw you graduate kindergarten and preschool.
So, Veronica, I have a question for you. What is it like to see Mommy up here talking about all these things?
It's like,
How do you feel? Is it a good feeling?
yeah,
Are you proud?
yes.
What else?
I'm proud for her for doing this.
Yay, all right, round of applause. All right. So who else has a question?
It's hard to top that, right?
That was a good one. Go ahead, just introduce yourself, please. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Maria Serrano. I work for a tech company that tracks social media and news sites. It's called Meltwater. My question for you is that when you saw the video of John Oliver, what was your first reaction?
The way I got the news was it was a Sunday, because that's when the show comes on, and I'm on the West Coast, and I'm driving from the Bay Area in San Jose back to LA because we had just spent the weekend at a family reunion for my husband, and I started getting texts from my East Coast friends saying, WTF, I just saw you on John Oliver, or oh my gosh. And I am driving at the time, so I asked my husband, I said, oh, this can't be good. Start Googling or look up Twitter, what's going on? This can't be good. And we couldn't find it until we drove all the way home, and then I saw it. And, you know, it was funny. And at the end of the day, it was a call to action that journalism is very important. And yes, we are trying different things. And yes, you need to experiment. And I will never apologize for everything that we've tried to do. Even if we haven't articulated it in the right way or in the best way, I would much rather be part of a company that's trying to change than a company that's comfortable trying the same thing over and over again and wondering why things aren't improving. So I took it in stride. And the John Oliver piece came in August. Those Vine videos, they were trickling through June and all summer, and I showed them to my children. I showed them to my nieces and nephews because they're growing up in a social media age. And you know, not everyone's going to say nice things about you on social media. And going back to that source, that fountain of confidence, just you always have to come back to, well, who are you? What are you all about? Are you trying? Are you doing your best? Yeah, we're going to make mistakes. Yeah, we might not speak the way we'd like to speak all the time. And it's perfect proof that everyone needs an editor, I would say. That's a good lesson right there. Even if it's a John Oliver saying, what did she just say? So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
That's true.
Any more questions from the floor? Yep. If you could just step to the podium, please introduce yourself.
I'm Yeshim Doriji. I'm from FIU. I'm a physics professor, and also I'm the director of Women and Gender Studies at the South Campus. My question to you is, I always find myself talking to our students, women students, and they are not aware that there's a glass ceiling. And I tell them there's a glass ceiling, you will hit it someday. But what's the best way of telling them? And what's the best way or your punchline telling them how to navigate it, the easiest way?
Well, like I said, I will say there is a power to not knowing there's a glass ceiling. And I would say that they will learn in their own time what the challenges are for them. And I will say that the challenges for one person may be completely different for the woman standing next to them, for the woman standing next to her. And when it comes to navigating, that they're not alone, that at some point or another they're going to face a challenge, whether it's that hard glass ceiling or it's an obstacle, that they should feel comfortable to communicate with others that they trust about what they're going through. Because I think sometimes we try to just figure it out and solve it all ourselves in our heads. And I know I've been guilty of that. Thankfully, I have a husband who's perfectly, okay with me talking, a lot. So thank you, Daniel, if you're watching. So what I would say is, I wouldn't necessarily just warn them off from the outset that there's a glass ceiling that they will inevitably hit, because I think there's a power to not seeing those obstacles and articulating what you want, especially early in your career. If you can articulate what you want and you're not afraid to speak up and say it, I think that's really powerful. They will then potentially be confronted with a lot of challenges, and then how to navigate that talking with one another. Maybe there's, organizations that they're part of where they can share and communicate with one another. That's what I would say.
That's good. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Maria Sanchez. I'm an alum from 2009 and currently work at Kellogg School of Management. My question is, you've been in your company for 11 years,
Yes.
and through that you've had challenges where you did not get the promotion that you seek. I find that these days, millennials tend to jump from one company to another or one opportunity to another. What has given you that grit, that resilience to stick the course for as long as you have so that you've been able to achieve those
Sure, no, that's a really good question. And like I said, I started out at the Miami Herald, and I would never have thought that I would have left the Herald after just 2.5 years. It was my hometown paper. It's the paper I had wanted to work and retire from. And I certainly didn't plan on moving across the country. But what has always driven me was opportunity. I always wanted to keep learning in my role. And usually, every 2, 3, sometimes 4 max years, I get that itch where I feel like, okay, I've been doing this, I get this. What's the next challenge? I love to learn, and I love a challenge. And so whenever I hit that point, I start thinking, well, what is that next challenge? And I've been very fortunate to have found a lot of challenges over the last 11 years within the same company. You know, so I started out when I came back to South Florida, you know, it was in 2006, I was the deputy business editor. But within a year or so, I was the business editor, and I then started running a department and in the area that I had really no experience in previously. So I was coming at it with a fresh set of eyes, and it was a brand new challenge. And I did that for about 3 years before they came asking about digital. And it was a great time for them to come asking because while it was scary, I was getting that itch. And then I moved on to digital, and that was a wonderful challenge. But part of that job was really working to work myself out of that job because we needed a consolidated, a newsroom that was digital, print, it was everything, that it wasn't just this is one arm and here's the other. And so I spent a lot of my years working on that before and as I became managing editor. And then now as the chief digital officer, what I have found very rewarding is that I'm working with a lot of newsrooms. And I've always said that, you know, if our industry is going to survive, it's not going to be because of one newsroom. It's not going to be because only the New York Times figures it out or the Washington Post figures it out. We all have to figure it out. And a paper as large as the Los Angeles Times, they can move the needle, absolutely. And so I love being part of that conversation.
Can you talk a little bit about being here at FIU as a student and then coming back and what it means to you, and also what was kind of born here inside of you that has grown and maybe remains? Can you touch on that a little bit?
Sure. So when I was here at FIU, I didn't know I wanted to go into journalism. I'm one of those students who started my freshman year at college thinking maybe I wanted to be a teacher. I'm not sure. I knew I wanted to have a family, but I didn't really know. And so it was not until the end of my freshman year that I just on a whim, started writing for The Beacon, which was a student paper here at FIU, which I heard recently got renamed, but I'm still calling it The Beacon. And it was through that I really learned to love telling stories and telling the stories of our time. And telling the stories of our time through, you know, accuracy and reflecting the voices that all should be reflected, and uncovering wrongs and righting wrongs. I started to really enjoy that. And so I eventually became the editor of The Beacon. And funny story, the summer of my junior year to senior year, I got an internship at the Boston Globe. And this was one of those great experiences where the Boston Globe had a great internship, and I'm sure they still do. And it was, if you got that internship, man, that was something to really add onto your resume. And I remember my first day of that internship, the head of Metro was looking at the 5 Metro interns, because back then they had 5 summer interns just devoted to Metro. And he looked at my resume and he says, you don't have any daily experience. Everyone else had a previous daily internship except me. And so rather than think, well, yeah, it's because I'm special and I earned it, I thought, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to do this? What is this going to be for me? Am I going to fail? And I remember my first assignment that day, I was frozen. I went to cover a speech. Ted Kennedy was speaking. I had to cover the speech, go back and write a very straightforward story. And I sat in front of the terminal and I just froze. And I started getting hot. And I thought, oh my gosh. So I went to the ladies' room and I put myself in a stall and I had to get my act together because I told myself, if this is what it's going to be like from this day forward in this career, boy, I'm glad I learned now that I don't want to do it. Either that or, you know, just go out there and get it done and you'll figure it out. And that's what I did. And I'm sure I didn't write the best story, but it got much better. So FIU was a great foundation, especially working for the student paper and making those day-to-day decisions of how do we cover something, what do we cover. And back then, there was no digital operation to the Beacon. It was all about the print edition, and we were only a staff of 3 when we started that semester that I was an editor, and we had to build up our staff. And you had to still print out the pages and wax them and take the pages to the printer in downtown Miami and not the best of neighborhoods. And I'd be getting home at 1 o'clock in the morning, and my parents were wondering, what are you doing? So those were very fond memories of FIU. And there were great professors here in the college, in the School of Journalism, that I'm still in touch with today, that makes being an FIU grad a very special thing for me.
Any more questions from the floor? Yeah. If you could come, introduce yourself. One at a time.
Hi, my name is, I don't know if you can hear me.
Sure.
My name is Vasquez. I'm actually the general manager of the radio station, so I'm involved with students. Can you guys hear me? Because I can't. No.
Got it.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Oh, this is better. My name is Erika Santiago. I'm actually involved with student media. I'm the general manager of the Roar. Finishing up my time as general manager. I'm about to graduate. And you mentioned, working for the Beacon during your time at FIU, and a huge, something interesting that I've noticed a lot with a lot of communications or journalism students is that they don't really see the value of working for their student paper. And not just at FIU, but at any university, they feel like, it's just the student paper. What can it really do? And especially now when every paper encompasses web, radio, and obviously print. So how would you, what is your advice for getting people more motivated in working for their school student media, be it at FIU or anywhere else? How would you instill that value in them, or have them see the value?
Well, now you got me on my soapbox, because I got to say, as managing editor of the Sun Sentinel, I'd come back to FIU every year to recruit interns for our summer internships, and that would be my first question to everybody. Did you work for the Beacon? Did you work? What did you do? Did you get an internship? I really think the value of the student paper or the student media operation is hugely important, because what you learn in the classroom is something that's going to support what you do on the day-to-day. Making those decisions, whether it's for a student-run paper or a professional publication, those are the kinds of things you need to learn to navigate. And it's not until you start to do that you don't really get a feel for what is the job really like. And I know I would not have gotten that internship at the Boston Globe had I not worked for my student paper, hands down.
And in follow-up to that question, but I think it's relevant, how many students do we have here in the room? Okay. My idea or observation, and I don't know if you agree within your perspective with the digital journey, is that this digital element now that is such a mainstay, as we know, and a forefront of what we're doing in our craft, it's kind of bridged that gap, I believe, between the aspiring journalists and the professional. I remember when I was in school, and again, this is, 14 years ago when I started in journalism school, it's like there was this big wall to climb if you were male or female before you could say, I am a journalist, television, radio, print. But now you can be a journalist. Really, anybody can be a journalist. I mean, obviously,
Anybody can call themselves.
Anybody can call themselves. But the tools, when you're studying it, the tools are there, and it's really about maximizing, even if you don't have an opportunity at the paper or if there's no television station on your campus. Can you talk about what digital allows that maybe wasn't there before?
Absolutely. So when you say, have you been published, it's not just have you been published in a print publication. I mean, being published can mean being published on a digital, native site. It could be a credible blog. But I got to tell you, credible being the key word. Writing for any old blog or diary writing, or the many people who espouse their opinions from their bathrooms and call themselves journalists. That's what we're up against. I mean, really working for a credible outlet is really important, and that's what's going to distinguish us going forward. When you hear all about the fake news and whatnot, we need to hold on to our credibility and hold on to it as strong as you can, because the minute you lose that, it's gone. It's very hard to earn it back.
And also with that, digital requires the same credibility that you
Absolutely.
have. Right?
The credibility, whether it's in print or if it's online, the credibility standard stands. That is the number one important piece that you all need to keep in mind as you're going through your journalism career. What kind of an organization are you work for? And how are you allowed to do your job? Are you going to be a professional journalist, or are you going to be someone who calls yourself a journalist, who kind of likes to write? And again, that comes in different forms. It could be video, it could be blogging, it could be live tweeting. Even live tweeting needs to be credible. Every piece of it, from A to Z.
Other questions? Yes.
Okay, it's working. Hi, my name is Naim K. Daniel. I'm the managing editor of Software to New Service. It's a publication.
I'm familiar with it.
Okay, great.
Yes.
My question is that you mentioned that you were extremely nervous when you took on the role of being over the digital aspect of journalism. Can you tell me more about your transition? Like, did you do any self-help courses, or how were you able to be successful in that transition?
Gosh, I probably did a little of everything. I know for sure I did take some courses, but it was really learning on the job. It was listening and talking to a lot of other people who are already in those roles. I fortunately had 2 women who previously were kind of trailblazers in the digital era, and they gave me lots of advice. And I remember one of them telling me, you know, every 6 months, it's going to change. And it's going to change a lot. The people who are running the show will move on to something else. And that priority will no longer be the priority. It'll be something else. And you got to be okay with that change. I will say that being in the digital space certainly taught me to become more friends with change. You know, because if you're not okay with change, you're not going to do well in the digital space. And so it was really a lot of learning on the job. And it was being comfortable and saying, I don't know what you're talking about. Could you please explain that to me? You know, and having those side conversations so that I got up to speed.
Okay, I have another question, if that's okay. All right. You mentioned your children and your family life. How do you find balance? And in addition to that question, you mentioned that when you went on an interview and you were pregnant, you were advised that it wouldn't be the best option to take on that role. How does any woman address someone or answer someone when that is said to them?
You know, I would love to know what I exactly said in that moment. It wasn't. it wasn't an interview. So this is someone who I had known. He had been. He actually had been a very big supporter of mine. You know, had helped me transition from being a reporter to an editor, and had encouraged me. And so this was more of a lunch talking about, hey, what's the next steps? I was approaching a good 3 years on that position I was in. And either I had asked for it, or we knew that there was going to be a turning point. And the next step for me, I knew, is I wanted to run my own department. And so if I could remember what I said at that time, I don't know. But I did take it in stride, made a mental note, and held in my anger, and did not say, well, you wouldn't say that to a man. I didn't say that in that moment.
Right.
But I didn't listen to it, needless to say. And I went on to have my son, and came back to a different role that I had wanted to pursue. I moved into features, and it was getting hard news stories out of the feature staff and trying to get them more on the front page. And it was a great challenge, and I loved it. But I soon moved and went back to South Florida, and then did run a department.
Okay, and the question was, how do you balance your family life with work life?
I wish I could tell you exactly the answer. I'm very, very fortunate that I have a husband and a partner who helps with that balancing act. He's a journalist and actually spent many years in the same newsroom together. And I've always made it clear, no matter what position I was in, whether I was a reporter or an assistant section editor or a department head, and certainly as you get, to higher ranks, it's much easier to speak up for yourself, right? And to say what you want. And I've always made it very clear that being a mom is important to me. I don't think I've ever really turned an opportunity down because I, can't do something because of my children. I just find a way to make it work. I think, and my kids who may or may not be listening, I do my best to go to their events and we walk to school together now, which I couldn't do before. It looks different at different stages, I gotta say. So being a new mom and having a newborn is a different type of work-life balance than a 12-year-old and a 7-year-old. And it's not to say one's easier than the other, they're just different challenges. One is, you know, they need to be fed, they need to be taken care of, you wanna make sure they're not broken, and and as they get older, you don't wanna ruin their lives. They gotta get the path to college, and the homework is important, and all the extracurricular activities, and so it's really having a support network and speaking up when it's important that you need to be somewhere else.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any more questions? Yeah?
Hi, my name is Jada Hall. I'm currently the sports director for The Beacon, now Panther Press.
Panther Press, okay.
Yes.
I'm still gonna call it the Beacon, sorry.
So I landed an internship with the Sun Sentinel for the summer.
Oh, congratulations.
And thank you. And I know that you previously worked there. This is my second internship so far. This semester I interned with PBS for production. But it'll be like my first actual, you know, going into 40 hours a week. I wanted to know, I know you talked about your experience a little bit with the Boston Globe, but what mentality, how should I really go into this? I'm kind of nervous.
It's perfectly normal to feel nervous. What I would say is, you know, don't turn away an assignment, even if you think, oh, I'm not sure if that's, you know, something I can really do. Come with your own ideas, because there's nothing more rewarding than having your own idea and seeing how that is executed. And they're going to respond to ideas. It may not be that every one of your ideas will be taken, but the fact that you're engaged and that you're thinking about ways to cover a beat, that will go off very well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
That's what I had. Any other questions? I'm actually going to pass out the mic to anyone. Question? Yeah.
I might not let go of this mic, so. My name is Tanya Schultz. I'm the president of Women in Communications, the Association for Women in Communications South Florida chapter. And I used to come down here and speak for Margot Berman's class. 2009, actually, talked about Twitter and Facebook. One of the questions I wanted to ask is we drove here from Boca Raton, actually, our chapter did, because we're trying to revise the FIU chapter. My question is, I've been doing this for 10 years right now as the president of Women in Communication, and I've talked to a lot of students, and the big question with the interns, do they get paid? Should interns get paid? I mean, come on, don't we think we should get paid? Right, okay. So
They do.
Okay, but in the past they didn't though, so what are your thoughts on that? Okay, so are they like minimum wage, or they
I
like
think it probably
$10
varies
an
from
hour,
place
or?
to place. But there are paid internships. I agree, there's probably not as many today as there were previously, and that's a huge challenge, I know, for students, especially for those who may want to, you know, to go to the Boston Globe. You know, yeah, I needed to get paid because that was a big move, and I was moving in with another roommate, another intern. And so, yeah, I think the landscape has changed a bit. But what I would say is, as much as you can, whether it's a paid internship or not a paid internship, if that's the best opportunity you have at that moment, I think it can really pay off in the long run.
And one more question.
Sure.
So when it comes to digital footprint and for interns, how important for you for when you meet an intern, candidates, how important is it for you to that they have a digital footprint? Would you pick someone that has a bigger following on Twitter because they started Twitter, you know, when in the beginning, or would you pick someone that has more, I guess, not digital, but more of the groundwork? So let's say they worked mostly print, but they didn't do digital. It's like,
in this day and age, if you don't have digital experience and you're applying for an internship, that's going to be a huge, huge challenge to overcome. And that's not to say I'm looking at how many Twitter followers you have. That actually is not what I'm looking at. What I'm looking at is, do you know how to navigate social media? Do you know how to shoot video? Do you know how to write quickly and turn around a story and iterate? You know, you file your first version of the story, and then you can update it as you go along. Do you know how to maintain a blog? Do you know how to live tweet? Those are all important skills to have. But at the end of the day, for any of those skills, if you don't have the foundation of knowing how to write and how to write well and communicate clearly and effectively, if you can't do that in a way that is visible, then that's going to be a huge knock. So just because it's 140 characters, doesn't mean quality it doesn't matter. It absolutely does. Absolutely does.
Other questions? Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Talia. I'm a fellow at the Kopenhaver Center, and I work at the Sun Sentinel. I remember when I was applying to the Sun Sentinel, it was my first career job, and I was looking at entry-level positions, and it seemed like they were looking for someone that had 10 years worth of experience at these like entry-level things, and it was really discouraging. And I know you said to, not look at barriers and not listen to that voice. I remember some of the jobs I wanted to apply to, but I was like, well, I don't necessarily have all of the skill sets that they're looking for, but I do still feel like I could execute this job well. Is it worth applying to these jobs that maybe are saying like, this is an entry-level job, but you need at least 5 years of experience? Or am I wasting the recruiter's time and my own time?
It's never a waste of time, not for you or for the recruiter, because at the end of the day, you make a connection with someone, and hopefully, regardless of whether you get that job at that moment, you've made a connection with someone, and hopefully you've had a chance to have a conversation about who you are, where you've come, what you're looking to do, and then now you have a way to connect with someone in the future when another opening happens. So I never would say it's a waste of time.
Okay, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please a big round of applause for Mrs. Ann Vasquez. Thank you so much for being with us this morning and for sharing your insight and your journey. We appreciate it.